Oh, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, October 4th, 2021 meeting of the SACOG Strategic Planning Committee. Let's go ahead and begin with, well, let's see. First, we're going to start with the clerk and any messages you need to give to the attendees before we do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. As you just heard, this meeting is being recorded. We do ask that you mute yourself if you aren't speaking, and if you are a member of the public and would like to make a public comment, please hit raise hand feature in Zoom or press *7 if you are participating telephonically.
Thank you, Renee. And let's go ahead with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. And if you'll all join me. Pledge
allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And Renee, if you would take roll call, please.
Yes, thank you. Directors Frericks?
Present.
Gallardo?
Yes.
Harris?
Here.
Sander?
Here.
Zaragoza?
Here.
Saylor? Absent. Chenier?
Here, Sailor just got here.
Oh, thank you. I will mark him as present. Thank you so much.
I got you covered, Don.
Thank you.
Salad?
Takes a village. Here.
Thank you. Soon?
Here.
Vice Chair Jennings is absent, and Chair Gore.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have public communication. Do we have any public communication, Renee?
We do not have any public comment.
Okay. Well, first of all, everyone, thanks for being here. Appreciate you taking some time. And I did realize that this meeting is often on the same time as the Policy and Innovation Committee, those same dates. And we'll try not to do that again in the future. That makes it really tough for staff and chair of the Policy and Innovation Committee. It's a full day. So if we're able to not do that in the future, we'll try. With that, let's start with our first action item. And this is in regards to remote board and committee meetings. And I'm thinking that that's going to be Mr. Trost. Are you here, Kirk? Or maybe
Yes, I am, Chair Gore. Thank you. So as many of you know, we've been meeting through this remote vehicle on Zoom, which is an exception to the provisions of the California Brown Act under an executive order by the governor, which expired at the end of September. The legislature adopted and the governor has now signed AB 361, which allows public agencies to continue to meet in generally the same fashion that we've been meeting over the last year and a half. We originally anticipated that we were going to have to adopt a resolution in order for us to continue to do this. There actually is a provision in the bill that allows us to continue to meet like this as long as there is a statewide emergency order and there are local and state provisions requiring social distancing. Under these circumstances, we've made a determination that the board and its committees can continue to meet without the adoption of a resolution. That may be required at some point in time, but it's not required now and will not be required for the next board meeting. So with that, we can proceed with the remainder of the agenda without action on this item.
Thank you, Kirk. And any questions on this item?
Well, Kirk, if I could, Bonnie.
Sure.
This is Don. Kirk, this is a little bit different interpretation than our Yolo County Council is applying. Is there some grounding that we can share with Bill Pogledich so that he can see what you're talking, what your interpretation is based on?
Yeah, and I'm happy to follow up with Phil, Director Saylor. There is a provision, and in fact, we had adopted the resolutions that were contained in the staff report with the notion that there would be resolutions required. There's been a lot of discussion in the legal community to try and sort out what the and they are complicated provisions that were included in AB 361, and still some unresolved questions in our mind about whether resolutions will be required in the future. But we were able to find a provision in the bill in subsection E, which says that if we are operating under a statewide emergency order, which we are, and if there are state and local provisions requiring social distancing, that resolution that is specified in the code is not required. Again, I think it is a clear question, but it's kind of been an overlooked provision in the legal community. We wanted to make this as streamlined as possible for SACOG, and that's what we've done. But I'll follow up with Phil directly.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Director Saylor. Probably all wondering that for our individual jurisdictions as well. Any public comment?
We do not have any public comment for this item.
All right, thank you. We appreciate that. So no action on this item, but we will move to item 2, which is framing the 2024 MTP SCS around a triple bottom line approach of economy, equity, and environment. And James, I will let you kick this off.
Great. Well, thank you, Chair Gore. Thank you, board members. It's good to see everybody. We did have a sort of a warm up in some ways to this discussion this morning at the Policy and Innovation Committee. And we also have a very special guest who I will introduce in just a short while here. So looking forward to this discussion as you say, Chair, kick off really early on the next long-range plan, our next metropolitan transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. I did first just want to introduce or reintroduce to you, since you all know her, the project manager for our MTP SCS, and that's Banu Abraham. I wanted Banu just to say a few things, maybe to set this up, and then we'll continue. Go ahead, Banu.
Thanks, James. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Banu Abraham, and I am the project manager for the 2024 MTP SCS. And last month was our official kickoff for the project update. So we have a bunch of work ahead of us that we are right now working on building a schedule and figuring out what are some of the key issues and policy areas that we need to explore. As you know, the land use and transportation challenges facing our region are complex, and finding solutions for these challenges as they relate to a regional planning effort like the MTP-SCS requires a holistic approach that examines the relationship between land use decisions, transportation infrastructure and programs, market conditions, and public policy. The work on the plan update pans over the next 2 years, a little over 2 years. So it starts now, and we are hoping then the plan will get adopted by February of 2024, so winter of 2024. But every work or every phase of our work will lead into, it is connected and it will lead you into another milestone that needs to happen in a timely and a critical way. So one of the first or earliest steps in the plan development process is the board adoption of a policy level document that will serve as an overarching framework to guide our staff's work and signal the major priorities of the plan to stakeholders, members, and partners. This policy framework is the first major milestone in our plan update and what we are here to begin discussing today. The policy framework represents a high-level organizing structure for major policy imperatives, regional priorities, and questions to be addressed in the long-range plan. A foundational element of the plan update process, the policy framework for 2024 MTP-SCS, will inform the overall work plan for the update, guide the specific analysis and research conducted for the plan, and provide guiding principles for how the plan should address federal and state requirements. Staff is anticipating that the board will take an action to adopt the policy framework in February of next year, which will be the end of our first phase of the plan, kicking off the major elements of plan update. With that, I would like to turn it over to James to lead a discussion about how a triple bottom line framework might be a good way to approach the multiple policy discussions and the board will have over the next 2 years of the work of our plan.
Thanks, Banu. Thanks for that overview. Yeah, like I said, we have a very special guest here today. Let me just say a couple things before I introduce Sunny. So Banu kind of laid out one of the first milestone sort of board actions is this policy framework. And what the background memo that we've sent in advance for this item lays out our proposal that we wanted to get the board to begin discussion on today, and it was really why we wanted Sunny to come to the board meeting. I think I've been around this triple bottom line framework for a long time, and I really like it for a lot of reasons, and I really think that it is an excellent way for us to think about designing our plan and going forward and kind of asking some big picture questions. Banu said earlier this morning at the Policy Innovation Committee that we have been working, as you know, on the prosperity strategy with a lot of our business partners around what kinds of transportation and infrastructure investments can actually boost economic prosperity, long-term economic prosperity, tradable sectors responding to the Brookings report. The second leg of the 3 E's is equity. And of course, we are doing a lot of work. The board's doing a lot of work on the race equity inclusion working group. This allows us to take equity out of literally the appendix, which is really where it sat for a long time in our long range plan, and really bring it into the forefront of the plan and honestly ask the questions around equity, leading with racial equity, but looking at income, looking at a number of different dimensions of equity and how it affects transportation, land use, and housing. And then finally, environment. We all know this. We have to have a plan that meets very strict environmental standards, greenhouse gas emission reduction, air quality conformity. But it too allows us, I think, to have a framework where we pull environment front and center and we ask ourselves, what does it mean to have a triple bottom line? It is not necessarily about trade-offs among those 3 things. It's about maximizing each one of them. So I'm not saying we have all the answers today, but I am saying, and there are certainly going to be other things you all are going to be thinking about and asking about in the development of this plan. I would submit to you that I think it's better to have a shorter, more strategic framework that we can embed into this plan. It's not that we won't ask and care about things like safety, many other concerns, that goods movement, right? But I think actually we can fit many of these things under a triple bottom line framework. Okay, with that, I am thrilled to introduce our guest speaker here today. I think some of you do know her, Sunny Wright McPeak. So Sunny is the president and CEO of the California Emerging Technology Fund, as you can see from her logo and her background, and I think has a lot to say actually in the area of technology and broadband and even the digital divide and equity when it comes to broadband. But I first got to know Sunny back in the Bay Area when I was working there. She was president of the Bay Area Council, and to have somebody who led the business community ask about equity repeatedly at our MTC board meetings and talk about the triple bottom line was very inspiring to me. Sunny served as the Secretary of Business, Transportation, and Housing for Governor Schwarzenegger in the early 2000s. And she also, just to round out her resume, ran for office and won when she was 30 years old, became a Contra Costa County supervisor, served in that role for 15 years and became president of CSAC. So I think she can see a lot of the same issues that we grapple with from a truly 360-degree experience. So Sunny, we're delighted to have you here. Take it away.
Thank you, James, and Chair Supervisor Gore and committee. It's such a pleasure to be able to join all you leaders who are taking on this task. And I was just so honored when James asked if I could engage in a conversation that is dear and near to me, having served in many roles in the public interest, some in elected office, some in public policy organizations. And before I was a county supervisor, I actually have a public health background. And my checkered past is this journey to figure out that you can't make the world well if they don't have a job or they live in a contaminated environment. I ran for county office because that's where public health services are delivered. And then I had to learn everything else along the way. The triple bottom line is my third religion. So I need to just sort of explain and share my perspective. I was born and baptized into my first religion. I then was elected to office the year that Proposition 13 passed, and I spent a whole lot of time, 16 years balancing budgets, in the end laying off people who had actually trained me and having to learn that there was a different way of going about business. But my second religion was public-private partnerships, which is it's much deeper than the superficial words that often are conveyed by that term. And then to be sure, as James's memo framing this issue, or maybe Manu did it as well, talks about the triple bottom line emerged in the 90s, and it was actually something that I was introduced to by Nick Bowman and Trish Kelly. So Nick Bowman was at the Hewlett Foundation and then the Irvine Foundation, and did a lot of work around the 3 E's with many of us. And then Trish Kelly was working with Nick. Trish, of course, is managing partner at Valley Vision, one of your key partners. So they introduced this to me, and it made so much sense as I was taking on the role at the Bay Area Council. I had worked with the partnership of our Association of Bay Area Governments and the Bay Area Council, called the Bay Area Economic Forum. And what is so important to, I think, share with everyone is, in my little farm girl, simple-minded framework, I grew up in the San Joaquin Valley, not in the Sacramento Valley, but in Merced County, rural Merced County. And so rely on the notion of citizens coming together, and the least government, the best, and voluntary cooperation is the most efficient form of government, as President Woodrow Wilson said. So the triple bottom line is this notion that there are not trade-offs, but actually we get higher returns in any one of the E's by optimizing the other two. So again, sort of in a very high level way, I think of it in terms of we got to grow the economy, clean up the environment, and share more of those two things with more people. And that it's not the trade-offs which suggest external unintended consequences. A triple bottom line, actually, as the economists would talk about, internalizes as much of the impacts as possible. And the magic is when we find strategies that address all three. And so James asked if I had any graphic for this. Rennie and I talked, I think somebody's going to put up a PowerPoint slide that I first drew at the Bay Area Economic Forum, and then the Bay Area Council, and then I dragged it along with me to the Business Transportation and Housing Agency when I was secretary. And believe it or not, it was embedded in the Transportation Plan 2025 for Caltrans, for the state of California, adopted by the California Transportation Commission. And this shows, although the overlap, the intersection, for those of you who love Venn diagrams, and I do, I love the construct of Venn diagrams from math, is that the sweet spot is where the economy, equity, environment overlap. And a good way of thinking about this, and I then added other E's. Some people said, well, we have an education E. And I said, education is an input to these outcomes of a prosperous economy, community equity, sometimes social equity as we use, or quality environment, as is enterprise, as is empowerment of people. So there's, a lot of ways in which you could express another set of E's as inputs. Some people take the 3's and they make them the 3 P's. They talk about planet, people, and profits. So that's the Glenda Humiston version of the 3 E's. Some of you have worked with Glenda in her role with USDA and now at the University of California in ag. And I like that construct when she talks about working landscapes. But it is also, when you think about the 3 E's, a way to get to, in a strategic plan, the how. And I want to just for a moment drill down. To be sure, we need to set really stretch goals that are informed by analysis of challenges that are all quantified. I always am setting goals that are informed by that analysis, that are quantified and are bigger than most people think we're going to get to. But if we don't know where we're going, any road will get us there. And so we did that at the California Emerging Technology Fund. We did that when I was Secretary of Business, Transportation, and Housing. Oftentimes setting those goals gets us closer to them than we ever thought we could. Oftentimes we don't quite make it, but we learn a lot along the way. In even establishing this working committee or any coming together people to confer, we have to have understood the why. Part we do this in regional organizations and metropolitan planning organizations because we're required to, but also we would do that anyway, just in order to be able to explain to the public what are we trying to achieve. The 3 E's gets us to the how that I find is so important in getting the greatest consensus among Californians. I have never been in a meeting where I don't really see coming together pretty quickly about 85% of the people when they understand how to not have trade-offs that is going to leave them disadvantaged, that it's going to get to a win-win, that there is greater welcoming to the opportunity to be a part of the solution. So a good example about a how is if we're investing in transportation, and believe me, I love transportation projects. When I became secretary, however, and saying to Caltrans, I need you to switch your thinking. We're no longer going to be a transportation bureaucracy, but a mobility company. The importance of that mobility was, okay, that's the outcome. We can actually measure it. I measured it pretty crudely. How many hours of delay on the major segments of California freeways, and then we set goals to drive those down. We use the models from all the 4 big MPOs, all which, by the way, had different algorithms that were behind it, but they were useful enough that we could still rely upon them for measuring progress statewide. And the notion of being a company suggested enterprise. We needed to be enterprising in our solutions. And so as opposed to working with all of the MPOs and the transportation agencies and the California Transportation Commission to think just about investments on a list of expenditures for projects, including even maintenance that Caltrans usually is mostly responsible for, that we thought in terms of if we're going to do a transportation project, how do we clean up the environment? How do we have the least impacts on the environment? How do we actually reach into neighborhoods that are lower income, oftentimes more impacted by transportation projects, and at least engage the residents in the planning, but also in the workforce training, in community science, in monitoring the impacts. I use that as an example of thinking differently about just how do we take our transportation dollars and invest them differently. I think we can take down this slide, but we can come back to it in a conversation. So I actually would love to be able to open up and talk more about with all of you in terms of your questions. I will reflect on having worked with many of you in the past, and I think Michael Saragosa will recall this. When I was secretary and I came in thinking, okay, at the Bay Area Council, so these are Fortune 500 CEOs who really always thought about only one bottom line. And I'm now introducing to them two others, but they got it pretty quickly. I must say, they actually understood that construct and embraced it fully. When SACOG was doing your blueprint, we in the Bay Area were doing a footprint. I loved your word better. So when I became secretary, we took the SACOG language and we did a blueprint grant invitation out to agencies to integrate, if you will, the 3 E's, integrate land use and housing with transportation and the environment and everything else that went with it. But we also forged the compact of the 3 E's in the Bay Area. And I sat there representing the economy E with another chair of that committee who was the CEO of PG&E, Dick Clark at the time, with Michelle, who was the head of the Sierra Club, with Carl Anthony, who was the head of Urban Habitat representing the 30. It took us at least 18 months and a little longer, but all 101 jurisdictions signed on to that compact. And I think that was very instructive to take the time to ensure we had all the stakeholders buying in, and we had a working agreement that there wasn't any outvoting anybody else. So no two could gang up on the third. You actually had to get to consensus around the 3 sets of representatives. I also then took all that great enthusiasm to the state level, and we started working on the concept of how do we incorporate the 3 E's into housing and transportation, and to have a strategy around growth. And we did a lot of work. I did a lot of work with my cabinet members on smart growth. In the end, we could never get agreement within the governor's office, the horseshoe, the full administration on smart growth. As Michael will recall, we at least agreed on anti-dumb growth. And believe it or not, we literally used the term, we are in agreement against dumb growth. And then we described dumb growth, which is sort of the opposite of what we might call, smart growth. But it was embracing the 3 E's from the very beginning. If James had allowed me another slide, I would have then put over that sweet spot of the 3 E's, housing. Housing's a linchpin. None of us can get anywhere on any of those 3 E's without enough housing for everybody at the right location, with good community design, and at scale for everybody. These days, I wear the hat of digital inclusion. The California Emerging Technology Fund is a really strange animal that the California Public Utilities Commission directed to be established out of mergers in 2005. It was a public benefit. And the order is very general. It says, go close the digital divide in California. We know the digital divide is just another manifestation of the economic divide, and that concentrated persistent poverty that we're really trying to overcome is all rooted in systemic racism. But trying now to take that lens, and we've called digital access a 21st century civil right for more than a decade. Jay Schenner will remember working in the Promise Zone applications in Sacramento for many years ago, trying to incorporate digital inclusion into those. Don Saylor has been the pioneer in the Sacramento Regional Broadband Consortium that Valley Vision sees. It's actually called the Connected Capital Area Regional Broadband Consortium. But also in Yolo County, they did an amazing thing, which is go to their LAFCO. They worked through LAFCO in order to advance the 3 E's and to get to digital equity. So there's always a very innovative way to come at the challenges. I just want to commend to you this concept and construct of that triple bottom line, the 3 E's, and endorse the wisdom of using that as not only a way to explain the why and the what, but also the how, and looking for the sweet spot will be the way to get to the greatest consensus, not only among your colleagues, but the greatest reception among the people we all represent. So, Chair Gore and Executive Officer Corliss, I think let's open it up for discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Sunny. Really appreciate it. Nice to hear from you, since I haven't had the opportunity prior to this. Questions from all of you in regards to this? Jump in or raise your hand, or John, did you raise your hand? I need to get this so I can see everybody. Go ahead.
I did, Bonnie. Thank you. And Sunny, it's always great to see you. I appreciate your being with us. And I'm curious, maybe from you and James, as we think about this next round for MTS, for our next MTPSCS, what linchpins do we have in the authorizing language for that process that we can draw upon to strengthen our focus on the 3E approach? And are there, we've always had that in our minds, but haven't actualized it, I don't think, to nearly to the extent that we can. And I think we can draw on our work with the mega region and the efforts to look at what makes a prosperous region, including a strong focus on diversity in the future. But I'd like to just get your sense of what are the pillars that we can draw on to make this focus be a part of our work. That makes sense?
When I hear that, John, and I'll defer to James or Banu, but I'm hearing when you ask pillars, so how do we anchor what you might end up being in the strategy to the source of funding, what you're doing the plan for? Is that a fair interpretation back? And I gave the example of working with Caltrans in the shift in the mindset to being a mobility company. When you articulate and declare what is the outcome of the use of the dollars that you're planning for, because that's always one of those issues. Will the funding entity find it to be acceptable? Who has to approve or rely on the plan we're doing at any given level? I think it's actually worthwhile to assert the relationship, if you will, the nexus between your working values, the premises, or which you're calling linchpins, to the intended outcome of the funds. A good example for me was when we were wanting to borrow on the SACOG example of the blueprint. And as I said, we had done work in the Bay Area. There was work being done by Sandag and SCAG. I mean, Sandag had done a lot under Gary Gallegos. They had their plan. Mark Pisano and Hisano Crata had done a lot for SCAG. The question was, where was I going to find the money? So, the horseshoe says to me, the governor's office says, okay, fine, great, but where are you going to come up with the money? And I said, I think we can use transportation planning dollars. And what the U.S. Department of Transportation and FHWA always is looking to guard against is somebody trying to rip off their planning dollars, their transportation planning dollars. To be sure, Norm Adet at the time was secretary, and I worked with Norm for many, many years on civil rights issues. But having said that, Mary Peters was sitting there as his FHWA secretary out of Arizona. And here's how we sustained the argument. I said, so the reason that we have a transportation system is to move people, goods, and services. It is for mobility. Everything we do in service of that mobility has to be considered a legitimate investment. And in fact, some people thought I was crazy as secretary when I said the best trip is a virtual trip. I even incorporated broadband into the strategies for that investment plan back in 2005. Because, you know, at the time, if I can unload a trip from the network, then I reduce congestion and decrease the impact on the environment. In the end, FHWA and the US Department of Transportation said, yes, they couldn't actually deny it. And we used literally just $5 million of transportation planning money to drive the blueprint planning statewide. And that was before the, you know, community plans that were then required, SB 375 or whatever the hell that was. So the linchpin is, I think, the first, or at least the beginning point, Dawn, is articulate the purpose of the plan, what is to be, if you will, served by the plan, the purpose of the funding that will implement that plan, and make those declarations. Declarations and findings are very powerful to be the underpinning to support what you want to do. That's so, James, do you want to add to it from your experience?
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to. And thanks, Sunny. I think the other thing that I would, because in some ways what we're getting to, and believe me, as a longtime transportation person, Banu has her work cut out for her because, and all the veterans here know, right? This is a very complicated process. The long range plan in this state of California is a very complex process. And in some ways, what we're trying to do with the policy framework is we're trying to actually hang things in a very simple and structured and very clear way. Interestingly, you know, our federal and state requirements, of which we have many, and we have to meet them all through this plan, are actually largely around environment and equity. And typically, I'll just say for us, those have ended up kind of literally in the physical appendix of the plan. We really, you know, we brought economic prosperity. I wish it was required of us to think about economic prosperity, because that would be, you know, I don't have to explain that to any of you. The other, I guess one more thing, Don, so I have other thoughts, and maybe for everybody's benefit. The thing that I appreciated coming through the last MTP SES and working with a lot of our partners, your staff, cities and counties, transit agencies, is to understand that this is also a document that helps us be more competitive for state and federal funds. And increasingly, the state and federal level, the three E questions will be asked of us, which is, what does this investment do for economy, equity, and environment? And if we have a good plan, and we're really just asking for your permission to go ask the questions right now, we have a plan that can answer in a meaningful way the three E questions, I think we will be, among other things, much more competitive for state and federal funds.
Thanks, James. Lucas, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks so much. Actually, two quick questions, and thanks so much, Sunny, for your presentation. So firstly, actually, I'll just start where James left off, because the question really was going to be about, and I would appreciate Sunny weighing in on this as well. And sort of, and again, admittedly, this is kind of a spitballing exercise, this part of it, but, you know, would appreciate you weighing in, especially regarding the potential likelihood that either MTPs, you know, federal mandated, or SCSs, state mandated, may actually see some sort of legislatively mandated requirement for inclusion of, you know, sort of the 3E approach. I mean, I think that's honestly, you know, my background as a long, you know, now lobbyist, but legislative staffer before that, you know, I mean, I see that's coming. That'd be my guess. And so just would love to hear a little bit more from you. And then I do have an additional question for you about the compact that you spoke about earlier. Thanks.
James? Thank you, Lucas. You want to go first, James?
Sure. Well, I think, as I said, you know, and you knew this, Lucas, pretty well too, but you know, the two E's, environment and equity, are in some way, shape, or form lightly regulated, environment more so because of the SCS and SB 375 in California. And I think, so I do see it coming. I see it coming more and more, if not regulated. I see it as I just said, really as a sort of a criteria, as an open-ended question to start with. What are you doing for the three E's? Show us that your plan makes progress. How are you measuring it? What data are you using? So I see it coming first in that way, but absolutely, we're looking at a lot of the Biden administration's infrastructure bill. A lot of the U.S. Department of Transportation has an RFI out on racial equity, right? So we submitted on that. We're trying to get some data back on that. So we have to kind of be in this game. It's a good question about whether the regulations are coming, the framework is coming, the grant criteria are coming, the questions are coming. Perhaps it passes prologue. The regulations may soon follow. I'd rather not wait for them, right? I'd rather be out in front.
I want to concur with what James said. I think you're just ahead of the curve. I can't tell you how many conversations or conferences I'm in lately that have the title in one way or another, equity in infrastructure investment, as an example. Even on if it's just limited to broadband. I referenced, Jay, your work in terms of promise neighborhoods, and we CETF signed on to legislation a couple of times trying to get a California version, and we wrote into that the 3 E's. So if I can write, and I wrote into state law that it's a preference of the state to pursue public-private partnerships. Give me bold leadership, not big government, that kind of notion. So we continue to advocate that it be explicit policy. However that's articulated, then I think it is coming. That is what we hear from every federal agency. What they don't have is how to do it. So they're at the values level, which is very, very good. The getting to the how and where those really effective strategies are, which is why I took the liberty to advocate for housing. I can barely spell technology. I know it's important and I'm not the expert, but boy, am I going to advocate for digital equity. And I think we do a pretty good job of actually charting the course and getting there. But I hear in the conversations from the secretaries of all the federal departments, and we're in conversations with them, real requests around the how. That's what SACOG has, again, the opportunity to be the trailblazer on.
Thank you so much for that, Sunny. I appreciate your perspective as well. The other question I had was just about the compact that you had referenced earlier. I didn't quite catch the jurisdictions. I apologize, but I did obviously catch the points around issues of consensus, which I thought were very important. So, but just would appreciate the framing of what that compact consisted of and such. Thank you.
And again, I think I misspoke and said 101 jurisdictions, 110. So it's the 9 Bay Area counties, and at the time there were 101 cities when I was at the Bay Area Council. There's been a few more incorporations, I think, but that's what it was.
Great, appreciate it.
And it literally is the 3 E's. It has the the 3 E's in every way you can possibly design it or show it.
Thanks so much.
Director Chenier.
Thanks, Bonnie. Sunny, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Jay.
Thanks for reminding me about the province neighborhood work. I have to go back to that. So I think I'm just looking for a little bit of advice around a couple of subjects that I think we need to deal with. They don't start with E, I apologize on that, but it's around leadership and strategic risk taking. Where we are today and the struggles that folks have in our neighborhoods, and in a lot of ways, equity being a main piece, but then even the basics of potholes and things like that, and what people see immediately, and the instant gratification society that we're in. How do we balance that out with the fact that we do need to lead, we do need to look a little bit over the horizon, and I think as much as we can within the framework of proposals that we put together for folks, take some risk taking, because we don't know what, and we'll use your word, right? We don't know what mobility will look like in 10 years and 20 years through the life of the reports and the work that we're doing. So how would you advise us to, be able to insert and embed some strategic risk and be leaders on that, while at the same time trying to make sure that folks are happy and not recalling us?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the fact you sit there in public office, and I was in local office, and people get to you at the grocery store and at the my dentist used to lobby me. So I have great respect for you, willing to serve. I think in my graphic I actually had the outer ring that said leadership. So I start there. Nothing gets done without leadership, and I define it simply as someone takes personal responsibility to make something happen. There's lots of other, very laudatory definitions, but I think I'm talking to leaders, to be sure. And that risk taking is not only being visionary, but it's being also, I think, pretty practical, strategic, and tactical. So when I talk about inclusion from the communities up, from each jurisdiction up, there's no short circuiting that. There is compression of time, however. What frustrates more people, in my experience, both elected officials, but also the people that we work for, is when we can't get to tangible results in a reasonable time frame for them. So being able to figure out what will be those deliverables that hit as much of the triple bottom line as possible, I think is really important. And I gave the example of recruiting into the transportation workforce those who are the least digitally advantaged, the most or who need the transportation. In the case of the digital equity issue, we're going to have, by the way, a huge problem that we flagged for the governor's office, we flagged for the legislature. With all of the money being thrown at infrastructure, we do not have today a trained construction workforce. And in the digital world, we don't have enough workers who know how to do the connecting of all of our devices at home. I mean, that's going to be huge. This is a great opportunity, and I really commend to you getting workers recruited to actually implement your plan. But your question is, so how not to get recalled in that? It is, how do you start delivering results that have been pretty, you laid out transparently. Even potholes can be and I love to fill potholes. My God, it saves wear and tear on cars, right? $600 a year is what we're all paying for lousy roads in California in one way or another. So looking at a program of the investment in road maintenance and restoration of the roadbed that has other benefits, including perhaps safety in neighborhoods, community leaders. Think in terms of how to do that is my only advice. And then if I knew how to be a better politician, I might have been in office longer. I think I was a pretty good public servant, but not a great politician. So I defer to all of you to be better than I was.
Easier said than done, right?
Yes, Bonnie.
Director Sander.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Sonny, I've got a question about data. I'm a scientist. I just recently read, actually, well, not till recently, but I've read a review, I think it was from the Sloan School of Management at MIT, talking about the importance of data when you're looking at equity issues. I'm going to use an example that is not in SACOG's purview to illustrate the complexity of this. So I'm in Rancho Cordova. We share a school district with Folsom. Folsom schools are much more highly ranked than Rancho Cordova schools. So what happens is parents who are particularly interested in their kids' education move those kids to Folsom schools because we're all in the same district. They can just transfer them over there. The kids who are left behind, by and large, have the parents who are less engaged. Maybe they don't have active parents at all engaged. So, there's no PTA at Cordova High. The expectation there is quite low. Meanwhile, Folsom can win a state championship with a wrestling team that's 80% from Rancho Cordova. So there's these real odd data inequities there, and it has to be remedied at the grassroots level. We have to address at the grassroots level, get real data, but my goodness, it's going to be hard to find in some aspects. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the importance of having real data before we make decisions, because there certainly are a lot of people who want to do something. Let's do something right now. We're in the moment. Let's go. But if we don't measure what we're doing, we don't actually know what we're doing.
Yep, that's I totally agree, Dave. As I said in the beginning, if you don't set the goals, quantify goals, so if we don't know where we're going, no road, every road will get us there. I think data is absolutely essential, and at the same time, I'm going to say, do not get lost in it. So look at what you can get and what you can rely upon that is fairly normalized across jurisdictions, that is relied upon as being comparable, if you will. Let's use your example in the school district. I will say you cannot get to digital equity or I'm using the word digital in front of it. Can't get to equity, as I said, without housing. You also can't get there without good schools. And there has to be extraordinary intervention in low-income communities, or equity just never happens. It takes probably tenfold what we're doing in intensity. And the California Emerging Technology Fund actually has a really effective program called School to Home. We go into middle schools for a variety of reasons, but it is intervening in the lowest performing middle schools in the poorest neighborhoods in California. We worked in Leotada Floyd in South Sacramento in SAC Unified as an example, but these days most of our funding requires us to be in Southern California. So LA Unified had 640,000 students before COVID and shelter in place, and 82% were on free and reduced lunch. I mean, huge pockets of poverty. That data, in terms of what the state collects, they actually collect a lot more than they can manage to, but we look at those scores and we turn around a school in 3 years with deep parent engagement at 80%, no less than 80% of the parents being engaged. So I also want to say it is possible. The technology actually enables parent engagement, no matter what is the home language spoken by the families. Even little, Google Translates actually is good enough for a family who does not speak English at home to talk to the teacher that generally is teaching in English, although they teach a lot in Spanish. It's amazing the dual immersion that's going on in most schools in California and low-income communities. And it takes the focus of getting those schools to become low-performing schools, become high-performing. All of you who are in city and county land should have a conversation with school leaders who are largely failing our kids for generations. They've been failed. Bonnie, I want to tell you, it was Supervisor Terry Cook out of Placer County who made me understand how counties needed to work with cities and school districts. That's where the city school county collaborative came from. It was Terry Cook right out of Placer. And so that's the first thing I'm going to say in intervening in school. You need to pay attention to that. That has a lot to do with land use planning, has a lot to do with economic integration of a neighborhood when you're either allowing new development or doing refill. And most of it is not infill, it's refill of economically underutilized land in order to improve mobility. And back to your question, Dave, about data, the most important outcomes that will integrate all of the activity, align all the activity, especially if you are a county supervisor, where we had human services and we take care of the failures in society, right? We have social services because people don't have enough income. We have mental health, drug, alcohol because people are dependent on drugs, alcohol and other drugs. We have probation because people have been in jail. What we don't have is a attitude or a directive out of any state code that says to county supervisors, to counties, the 58, you shall get kids in your county who are in school to be high performing, but they are the best canaries in the mine. If everything else is working, those kids that are going to schools and low-income communities will become high performing. And so the big outcomes are employment, unemployment, and the average wage, health status, which is a multifaceted indicator to be sure, education attainment, and it is the poverty level, not just employment, but poverty level, and then crime rates. So those big five, if everybody was held accountable to those big five, we have to break through the silos and be on the same page, not just with the city of Rancho Cordova, but with the county and with your school district. And yeah, parents will still gravitate to where their kids can get a good education. And of course, the real estate values are much higher where schools perform. You just can't leave behind the kids that are going to Rancho Cordova High. And you have to have that really straight talk with the trustees and the superintendent to say, you have to be on board. How are you going to get to these kids to be high performing? I can assure you, kids that come from low income families are just as smart as everybody else. But they have a multiple set of factors and forces that I call the wall of poverty. You have to be not only really smart, but really lucky to get over that wall of poverty. And that's why I say it takes an extraordinary intervention. And if you think this is just my first religious upbringing and my wanting to make the world better, it's true. But I sat with the CEOs of these companies and said, every person who is poor is a drag on the economy. Not only are we paying for them once, in terms of whatever are the social services, we are paying a much higher price because we are not tapping into their talents to contribute to economic prosperity. That's pretty bottom line, hard-nosed in terms of business. And I am a fierce capitalist. I will debate anytime, anywhere, people on how to grow our economy. Having poverty, and there's more poverty today in California than when I graduated from college. How dare we? It's an indictment on our failures. The only way we break through that, just to come back to respond and to continue preaching, is it's literally with the alignment of all of the leaders, and I do say county and city folks have to have the school folks absolutely with you in order to get this job accomplished.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you reminding why we talk about these issues, right? It's not just equity for equity's sake. It really is about individuals and them having an opportunity to be successful in life.
Yes.
So, any other questions? Thank you so much for taking your time. Really appreciate hearing from you. Those who know you have spoken very highly of you, and I really appreciate you sharing with your perspective, with us your perspective, and really reminding us at the core why this work matters. Michael, you'd like to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. I just want to say thank you, Sunny. It's always great to hear you because you're one of those folks that look at things this way and not just linear. And so sometimes it's easy to fall into that linear pattern when you're someone in our position, because you're just dealing with the day-to-day and what's going on. And you do have to take that step back and look at things from that top down and not just in that linear pattern. So I just want to thank you for that. I've had the chance. I guess I was in my late 20s at that point. So I've grown up a lot since then, but Sunny taught me a lot when we both worked in the Schwarzenegger administration, and we got a chance to work on some merger issues last year in telecommunications as well. So again, Sunny, thanks so much for coming today and speaking with us and giving us your thoughts on the triple bottom line. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Michael. I say to you and Bonnie and everybody else, what a talented group. All this brain power. I expect that your next February that you're going to have a gangbuster report, and it'll be a beacon for the rest of California. And thank you so much for giving me the honor of joining you today. Thanks, James.
Great to have you, Sunny.
Good. I'm going to drop off so some other people can yell at me, and you're going to continue your meeting. Okay. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, that was terrific. Thank you, James. Where are we at? We are moving on to our next item, which is item 3, and that is measuring SACOG's progress, performance, and impact. So James, I'll let you kick it off, and we can have our conversation about that.
Thanks, Chair Gore. So as the again, last meeting of the calendar year for this committee, we wanted just to put this item in front of you to get some of your thoughts and feedback. And I think the way that I shorthand this these days is, once a year you do my evaluation as your executive director, and the question is, how am I doing? At SACOG, we've done a number of different sort of survey tools to understand how's our staff doing. And I think the third leg of that stool in terms of evaluation and sort of self-assessment is, how are we doing as an agency, which is hard to disconnect from the question of how are we doing as a region? How are we doing on achieving our goals? And I wanted to try just to tee up this conversation, get your insights today as your staff goes back and actually starts work on a calendar year 2022 work plan, and you'll see you'll get to see that again as the board at the end of this year. You'll get to see it again in January as we bring you an annual work plan. You got some attachments in front of you in this item, and I would say to start off, and again, it's a nice committee to do this in because we have all our former board chairs, and so you've been through many of you have been through many of the iterations here. But to start off, as a reminder, starting in 2017 at our board retreat, we did a lot of work, and we had a lot of new board members, and I was brand new, and we sort of asked the question. In fact, you all asked the question of me when I came here, which is, what are we all about? What are we trying to achieve? What does success look like for SACOG? What does success look like for the region? And it was, sometimes the simplest questions are the hardest. Obviously, I had answers for you, but it really made me think a little bit about how do we evaluate our success? We have a work plan every year. We have a very big document called the Overall Work Program, the OWP. The Policy Innovation Committee just took an action to amend that this morning. And that has all of our work, all of our projects, our budget, our deliverables. But it can sometimes be, for board members, a hard document to sort of, just jump into and jump out of and get a sense of the direction we're heading in. So starting in that board retreat back in 2017, we had a board retreat, and we asked all of you to sort of help shape some higher level goals as a board, as an agency. And we came out of that retreat with, if those of you who are veterans remember, 10 goals. We then dipped back into that again when Director Sander was chair of the board in 2019 with a retreat in Rancho Cordova. And many of you had said, hey, 10 is too many. We need fewer, as we just presented the triple bottom line framework to you. There really is, I believe, a benefit to being focused and having fewer. We emerged from that retreat with a bit more work in 2019 with 3 goals: economic prosperity, connected communities, and vibrant places. And we also started just trying to basically articulate an annual work plan for all of you as the board that you also have as an attachment that is not the specificity of the overall work program, but something that is easy to see, easy to know what we're working on. It's been very helpful, by the way, for our dozen new board members this year. It's been a great document. And then at the end of the calendar year, of course, these two things are related. We give you a 2-page annual report that is also fairly new, also in your attachments. So what did we do? What did we accomplish this year? I will say that is a very, in some ways, that's a document of all the good news, right? That's a document of the wins. That's what did we accomplish? What could we celebrate? But it isn't necessarily the how are we doing? It is necessarily, I think, maybe a deeper self-assessment that in talking to and many of you in board leadership about, I get the impression you'd like to get sort of a layer beyond that. You'd like to dig into that a little bit more and understand, are we succeeding or are we not succeeding? And just to step back from that, right, to sort of look at our longer range goals and objectives, they're really rooted in our long range plan. We just talked about a triple bottom line approach to our next long range plan. In some ways, our goals in the long term are the region's goals, are the goals of that plan. And even though that plan doesn't cover absolutely everything, in many ways that many of you as local electeds care about on a day-to-day basis, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Sustainable Community Strategy really does encompass a lot. It carries the blueprint forward from 2004. It embeds that in a long-range plan. And increasingly, and this is why we provided our final attachment of Chapter 4 of the MTP SES from last time, it tries to lay out what does the next 5 years look like in terms of progress towards our long-range goals. And interestingly, a lot of that progress is about our partner agencies. It's about your cities and counties. It's about our transit agencies. It's about Caltrans. It's about some of our private sector partners partnering with us. So we've laid those out as well in that Chapter 4. We are continuing as a staff at this agency to try to connect. Again, we have a work plan. What do we accomplish in our work plan? Our deliverables. But to lift our heads up more than once a year, and then to understand what's the impact of that. How do we know we're making progress? And as I've said to my team and my staff many times, and I know this is obvious to any of you, but SACOG can't do this all by ourselves. 28 cities and counties in some ways can't do this all by ourselves. So we need to rely on the work of, we need to rely on partnerships. We need to rely on our delegation, the state capitol, on our congressional delegation. We need to rely on a lot more partners to be able to begin to measure success. So, so with that, I would just like to get a bit of a discussion, some feedback going, and I hope you've had a chance to review those documents. Obviously, we bring those back in front of you pretty frequently, but I would say versus say 4 years ago, there's a lot more that we are doing to try to articulate what's our next year look like, what success look like, what have we achieved this past calendar year in our annual report. Our MTP, I think last time was very explicit about a 5-year window, a 5-year look. How do we know if we're making progress, we're making success? I think we have a ways to go, to be clear, to connect the dots there, to actually connect the dots between our work, between local action, right, between where we need to be in 5 years, where we need to be in 20 years. And so we're not there yet, but I think we're a bit on that path. So we thought this was a good chance to pause your last SBC meeting of the year. If I could get some discussion, some feedback, it would help us, inform us as we go into the development of next year's work plan. But we're trying to, as we do next year's work plan, we're trying to look 5 years out, because we're a long range planning agency. We're trying to look 10 years out. And we will bring back, I think, some updated outcomes, measures of success and measures of impact to you based on the discussion today. I hope that makes sense. I hope you appreciate that we are trying to look beyond just the work we do into the broader world, and to recognize the importance of our partners, our partner agencies, and so on. So I'll close there.
Thank you, James. Initial thoughts from folks, input, comments?
If I may, Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, just real quick, James, that's a big challenge. Yeah, as you say, connecting the dots, measuring the impact of our work. My gosh, so many things that we do in these positions in these municipalities. We do a lot of work, but how do we track down the feedback from those who utilize the services or benefiting from them? We have some external things, tax base and whatnot, but to really get the quality of life metric quantified and on paper is a challenge. So from me to you, I want I recognize that, but I definitely know and see that you're doing a lot of good work. And I think in your position with your staff, they're so responsive, and the plans we have in place and the intent behind them, I think is admirable. So keep up the good work. But I do empathize with some of this stuff is really hard to connect those dots. And I shoot, if we can come up with a reason and way to do it, I want to know so I can use it here in Yuba City. It's tough sometimes. So thank you.
That is very true. Other comments, thoughts, input? Many of you have been doing this a lot longer than I have. Go ahead, Don.
So there's so much here because there's so much that we've got on our plate. One of the things that I continue to be interested in is tangible progress on the pricing strategies for roadway use. And I see the reference as that it's ongoing. We're looking at pilot projects and looking at places, segments, ways of starting the effort. And we've been kind of in that, seems to me like we've been in that status for some time. And I'm interested in what your sense, James, of how we can move forward with some alacrity here and some urgency, because I think that there is some urgency. And so there you go.
Oh, it's a great question, Don. And maybe too, it speaks a little bit to sort of these interim measures, right? So we know where we want to be in 20 years, I think, on this topic. We know where we're at right now, which again, the Policy Innovation Committee just heard the topic this morning to go out to bid for consultant to set up this pricing pilot, but there's a lot in between there. I could give you some measures of success, which are, we need, and what's in our MTP SES, we need a network of express lanes across the entire region, right? That can take HOVs you can buy into as a solo driver, and it begins to become our backbone network for an express bus network, because we've got to give some time premiums, and we need that really soon. The great work of the Mega Region Working Group and the federal grant that we just won on infra for the YOLO Causeway is a start. But it's another also, I think, it's a good, I think, reminder that we've got to have our partner agencies right alongside us. Not just that we're not working with Caltrans and YCTD, because we are, but I would also suggest to you, I'm just trying to give you my kind of honest, almost end of the year SPC, right, update here. I don't know that we have the same metrics. I don't know that we have, in the deliverables we do, in the very, cost, scope, budget, schedule, go win some grants. Absolutely. I've heard that loud and clear from this board, which is why it's in here, which is win as much transportation funding as we can as a region, be competitive. You've said that from day one, right? But that alone actually isn't, as Sonny just said earlier, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Transportation grants for what? Are we being strategic? Are we making our case? So I'm not going to tell you that we have the path completely scoped out and figured out on pricing. I think we've made some really good first steps, one of which is to embed it in our last MTP in 2019 and endorse it as a board. That actually cleared the way to win this grant. It's cleared the way for a number of other things. But one note, and I know I focus a lot on federal and state advocacy, but if you remember the stimulus report that we did last summer, it seems like 5 years ago, but it was just in the summer of 2020, we got together with 50 agencies and we said, here's our ready to go projects for $2 trillion infrastructure package. That opened the doors, and we've got Regional Water Authority coming on Thursday to the board lunch. It really did open the doors, I think, to begin. And again, not that we don't work with good working relationships and partnerships, but I think to make them stronger so that we actually, as a region, can see the same problems, can get on the same page. For instance, green means go, infill development, climate resilience is going to take our water partners absolutely like this with us. It's not enough for us to, talk to them a couple of times a year. We're going to have to work hand in hand. So I don't know that I've answered your question, other than I probably need a better answer than the one I'm giving you. I'm proud of the work we've started on roadway pricing, but I think as I'm saying,
yeah, one of one of the things that's interesting is how many questions we have yet ahead of us on that topic. That the questions about how does it impact the issues of equity and inclusion I think that's an interesting question that's come up in our local consideration of pricing strategies as a way to have access to speed of mobility. So how do we do? So I think that's very interesting, the number of questions that we're going to need to face. And I'd like to have us begin to face some of those questions so that we can inform, for example, that Infra 80 project, we can inform it with our regional perspective on how to move forward. And I think that particular one, there's a lot of reference to managed lane, but there's no yet the framework has not been set out for what we mean when we say that. And I think SACOG has a valuable role to play in helping to set that framework.
And you'll be happy to hear from the presentation from Sabrina Bradbury and our staff this morning. That is embedded in our grant. We are going to be doing that in the RFP, looking specifically at equity and regressivity. I would just suggest to you one thought to chew on. And in this chapter 4 of the MTP SES, right, we lay out these goals. We say what are the actions are we have to take with our partners. I gave the example of the stimulus report. I think we need to do better on this. I think we need an MTP that is actually owned by the region, across the agencies, across our partners. I worry it's a great document, as we said in the last item, to go get a grant. It's an important document to show the state we're kind of being fiscally constrained and constrained by our and strategic around things like greenhouse gas emission reduction. But I don't yet think it does enough as a call for action that's across the board.
Well, all this I drilled on that one, James. There'll be more conversation about it. I will tell you that the overall sense that I have reading this is just absolute pride in the work that the region is doing and the work that this agency is doing, and the opportunities for us to continue to be the beacon, I think, are there. And so that I think we need to make some of these things real sooner than maybe we might if we don't drill every once in a while. But I think the framework that we're working within as an organization and as a board is really where we ought to be. I'm so impressed with this group.
Thank you, Don. Other questions, thoughts based on this conversation? Tom, are you going to say something? It looked like you were going to open your mouth. There you go.
Are you talking to me, Bonnie?
Yeah.
I certainly agree with James that buy-in, there's nothing as good as buy-in, regional buy-in. That certainly was true when we adopted the blueprint so many years ago. And it was very exciting for a period of time while everybody was talking about it. And I remember Roseville in particular took and rezoned an area for affordable housing, which was a tough political lift for York City. But you did it because you wanted to do your part to enhance and move forward the blueprint. So I think if we all felt that, it's great. There's something about the fact that we have to do this thing every 3 or 4 years. It's almost becoming rote. I think this is my 4th one, at least. And, it feels like it's just kind of always there. So the specialness of it almost gets diluted. And maybe you'll have to work hard to figure out ways to make it more special for all of us, so that it just isn't checking another box that the state has laid on us, but something that's truly organic and ours and feels like ours, and we really own up to. The only other thing I'd like to say is I don't find the triple bottom line concept all that remarkable. To me, a good decision making has many factors. It should never be just economics. It should always be a combination of factors. So I feel this is not all that revolutionary. It's, to me, almost self-evident and obvious. And so okay, let's get on with it and make it happen. That's all I have to offer.
Thanks, Tom. And the interesting point about the process seemed like every 3-4 years we keep doing the same thing, and
It's like renewing your driver's license. You know, how exciting can that be?
But we're going to be talking this next month about the next generation transit, right? And trying to have a dynamic conversation about where are we at and where do we want to go, and what is the leadership it takes to get where we're wanting to go. Those are, to Don's point, those are the challenging questions, the bigger picture items, or where do we take leadership and how do we move forward on some of these things that we've done it the same way for a long time.
If I could throw one more thought in there, and I'm kind of thinking as I articulate, and that is, maybe we should stop using this 6-letter acronym for this process. Why don't we just call it the next big plan?
Did our communications team talk to you in advance of this? That's exactly what they're trying to do.
All right, okay, drop the alphabet soup, drop it and move on.
Can I just say something, Director Stoller? Because this is, if this feels rote every 4 years, and you're throwing a challenge at our feet, and I will throw one back at you, which is we're not gonna succeed as a region if this is a rote plan. And perhaps that's a little bit of the indication about why we need more buy-in to it. This has got to be, and I know it's hard because we have to meet, as my staff knows, thousands of requirements, but we do this in part because of the blueprint. We do this in part because you all saw a future 15 years ago and you decided to act, right? And I think I speak for many on the SACOG staff. If this is just feeling like an exercise that you go through every 4 years, we are going to fail, not just as SACOG. We're going to fail as this region. So I think we need your help to figure this piece out.
Well, we did the blueprint. We did it because we wanted to do it. Nobody told us to do it. Now we have these big series of boxes, and we're in a constant treadmill. And so I would say, SACOG, keep that in the background. Do what we have to do, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. But let us do for ourselves what we think is important for the future of the region. I think that will get us excited.
My question for you all is just because we have to, how do we take a plan and make it meaningful and make it stick? Because it's a lot of what this agency does. So it's a really important point I just wanted to pause on. This is exactly the kind of discussion that I think this group should be having. This is why you're the strategic planning committee. So I appreciate it. And I know Director Ferricks has his hand up too.
Yeah, go ahead, Lucas.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the discussion. I just was going to add in a few quick items, based on what I've heard so far, but also, the questions we're being asked. So, are we delivering on our work plan? Yes, I would say. I think that's, definitively yes. You look at the item, I think it's the first attachment, 2020 highlights, and just a number of places where, clearly already, I'm just excited. I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, wait, we finished this one. Oh, wait, we finished this one. Oh, we're, making good progress on this one. So, Green Means Go, that's certainly something where there's the 2021 item we'll have a significant update on, having sort of the 2020 funding round framework, that's obviously that, was decided upon, but good progress has been made there. And that was a process that, obviously was not, the easiest, but it also was a very, very thoughtful process and resulted in a major sort of, I would say, upgrade to the the MTP, or that sort of the funding formula and framework, how that sort of money goes out the door. And for the first time in a long time, it was real changes there. I think additionally, I'm obviously fortunate to serve on the mega region working group, so know the work that's being done there. But that is also something that there's been a lot of momentum this year in 2021 on. And then frankly, while I think there's a lot of work to still do, the REI working group, there's been a fair amount of progress in that arena as well. And so that's, I feel like, just thinking about what the 2021 highlights look like already, there's a lot of things that have been really already continue to be worked upon. And so if that's any indicator of sort of the, checking in on the work plan and, is the agency sort of taking care of the things it's setting out to do based on the 2020 highlights that have been presented? The answer is yes, already thus far for 2021. I do think, though, that, second question, though, is that, is our work having the intended impact, and is our region moving the needle on key indicators? We heard this from Sunny McPeak earlier. Poverty is at an basically all-time high in California. And, and we, while that's not explicitly our problem, our issue to solve, the economic indicators issues that where we work with our partners at Valley Vision and others, would definitely, I would think, in the chambers and such, I think would definitely lead us to say that, there's a lot of work to do. I would say, I think that that's something, an area where we know people are being left behind. This is a pandemic aside. I think that that's a real issue and struggle in many of our communities. And so I think that's something that we really, need work on, no question. And then I think, finally, the final comment would just be around the issue of evaluation. It's often the hardest part for, I think, public agencies to, for many agencies, whether public or private, but for public agencies to do real, truth in advertising sort of evaluation. And I think because sometimes the answers are not all that pretty. And so I think that that's something that we just continue, we need to, I don't have an explicit suggestion or answer for how to go about doing the best evaluation possible, but I would, I'm sure there's some of my colleagues here have some thoughts around that. Looking at Dr. Sander as an example, but also, I think that there's probably some real other good examples out there in terms of templates, or that might be something that we really dig in on in terms of how do we do meaningful evaluation of some of these topics. It's something that I know some of the other agencies that I'm involved with struggle with as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lucas. Darren?
Thanks, Bonnie, and thank you, Lucas, for organizing those thoughts for me. I was just listening to this conversation, and a bunch of things went through my mind. First, I just want to acknowledge that absolutely, James, think that your staff, your board is making a lot of progress. Are you guys hearing me okay? Okay, I was breaking up on my end, but are demonstrating a lot of progress on things, on the tangible things, program execution. We're being innovative with Green Means Go. That concept in itself, having our state leaders unified on this front, the list of projects. James, you mentioned the larger or broader federal list of things we put together as a region, or you and your staff put together as a region that we tried to advocate for back in DC. All those things are great. Maybe not things that we can necessarily check the box, because you're never done with that kind of thing. So it's more of a progress. And so I think to Tom's point, maybe that's why it feels a little rote, is that we're doing it every 4 years, but it seems like we're still talking about the same things every 4 years. And what I also recognize is I look at even this committee, how many of us came on at different points to serve on this board. So there's all these different levels of understanding. Don and Tom, you guys are sitting here talking about, the blueprint, right? And I was very fortunate that I participated in that process as a citizen. So I had some glimpse of what that was, but I would bet $100 that a lot of people on our board have no idea what you're talking about in terms of, the why you decided to go down this path of the blueprint, what it means and all that. So what I'm getting at is it's hard we're here as a strategic committee, and we're trying to, point the board in a different direction, but I feel like we're not only at different levels of understanding of the, I'm gonna call it the fundamental things, but then you throw in COVID and we're in this changing dynamic, and none of us here knows, what this is going to mean for how, that's going to affect our transportation network. We've become a bit more woke in the equity and inclusion arena, and we're wrestling with, I think a uniform, commitment and understanding to that aspect. And what does that mean? What does success look like? We've talked about prosperity, but again, the metrics of that, what does that look like for each one of us? So I feel like there's a lot more conversations that need to be had in order for us to gel and I think give you what you're looking for, James. And we're going to do the best we can, but I just feel like there's a lot of moving parts here, and so anyway, I just wanted to kind of explicitly recognize those things. So thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Other comments? I will say, I appreciate that comment, Darren. I think one of the things we're really trying to do is get people up to speed, right? The lunch meetings, trying to educate our new directors as much as we can. And it is a learning process, because this I'm just now learning what those six letters stand for. And we've been doing this for several years, right?
Imagine how off-putting that term is to people who don't are involved.
Yeah, you sort of glaze over, huh?
Yes.
And I'll share this. The one thing I've enjoyed about SACOG the last couple of years are some of the innovative programs we've been doing, like Green Means Go and youth leadership. It's been going for a little while longer, and the conversations about telecommuting and that, and they don't all directly affect, some do, right? The plan, but those one-offs are the things that are really exciting that we actually accomplished, right? Like we accomplished Green Means Go, and that's really exciting that your team, James, along with this group of leaders, said, hey, we're going to go this direction and work towards this end to get to look at a different way to solve problems that we're all experiencing when it comes to housing and transportation and infill areas, right? So I do have to share that I think, y'all have done some really exciting things. And it's like, but it's just a long haul, I guess that's it, right? And you're acknowledging that, and we're slowly making progress, and it'd be nicer if it's faster, but I think it was Lucas said we made some really good progress, and that's to me really heartening when you're talking about a very large region with different perspectives. And I do think we have a group of people, especially because we've got 12 new directors, and there's a lot of interest with this group. These new directors really are interested, and so I think that we do have some opportunity, have a new plan, a great big, very audacious plan to do some different things. But it takes just a lot of effort and a lot of conversations and a lot of digging in. So I don't know, James, if you got what you wanted, but you got an earful.
No, this is on it, as I said, I think this is actually the level that this committee should be at. And we should do more, I think, to curate a little bit of this high level, where are we going? What's the why, right? Why are we doing this? I will say, to close this out, obviously the big 6-letter acronym is a very important thing we do. And it is long haul, it's long range, it's long haul, and it's hard, right? It's hard to engage the public, right? On what do you want your life to be like in 2050? Well, I know what I want my life to be like right now. I know what's missing right now. I know what I need right now. It's much harder in 2050. And honestly, since I've arrived here, I have looked for some things that are short wins, that are tangible, that not just you, right, but we as a region can feel some progress on, that are the short stepping stones towards that long haul, right? That's really the sort of the point of this item. I just want to close, and Tom, I always I always listen to what everybody says, but when Tom says it's a little rote by now, I'm sitting up and paying attention. I would just say to close this and the meeting today, for the 3 E's, that may seem obvious, it may seem unremarkable, but if you think about climate change and preparing for natural disasters and adaptation, please come to lunch on Thursday. If you think about racial equity and the gaps we're trying to address in terms of housing, in terms of mobility, and you think about our economy still being dependent on government and social and service sector jobs, and the economic revitalization that our existing communities need through things like Green Means Go, those are fundamental. So, they need to be exciting. They need to be exciting. They need to be a challenge. They need to be engaging.
Mhm.
So help us solve that puzzle in some way, please. And you'll have a chance. The good news is you'll have a chance to.
Well, we certainly appreciate absolutely everything that everyone is doing. And you wanted candor, so you got candor at this meeting. But I still think SACOG is a remarkably successful agency, and I doubt anybody in this panel would disagree with that. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom. And yeah, we do need to have candor, and especially from folks who've been serving with this board for a long time, right? Because you've seen a lot and you've got great insight. So really appreciate that. Let's see. So let's wrap this up. Anything else, James? Or anything that any of you all, any other matters that we'd like to discuss? Anyone want to bring anything up that needs to be addressed or considered future meetings or anything like that? I know you need to wrap up, but I don't want to end without having folks have an opportunity to share something if it's important to share with the group for future conversations.
It's Apple Hill season, so come on up to Placerville.
My CEO went this weekend and he said he loved it. It was the first time he had been up there and he really enjoyed it.
Perfect. No, everyone up in that area that closed, we weren't sure with the fires. They ended up being unscathed through that, but certainly a scary time for them. So yeah, we appreciate everyone coming through.
Well, and Michael, I appreciate that, right? It's a reminder that y'all have really suffered a lot in your community, and how do we, just encourage our residents to support a community that's been hard hit.
Thank you.
Is that the 10th arrondissement?
What was that, Don?
Just asking which arrondissement is that? Is that 10?
Yes.
All right, anyone else? Okay, well then we've got committee meetings this week, and our next board meeting is on, I think, the 21st. And I believe we're gonna have Portia Middleton's sharing prior to the meeting at 9 a.m. So if y'all are able to at least tune in for a few minutes and listen to her share what's going on in Citrus Heights, that would be great. So thanks everyone for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it, and we'll see y'all soon. With that, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. Bye.
Thanks, Bonnie.